Chicago, it's no mystery that Chevy is your best bet for the unpredictable spring ahead. The snow and ice may be gone, but the spring plot thickens at your local Chevy dealer, where you'll find the true MO of SUVs. If you're thinking about taking all the twists and turns in a new Chevy, you're not alone. The right vehicle makes all the difference when it comes to safety, confidence, and comfort on the road. You saw the Chevy lineup at the auto show. Now it's time to see which one you can identify. And don't worry, they can't see you behind the glass. Need the power and durability of a Silverado? The all-weather confidence of an Equinox or Blazer? The spacious comfort of a Traverse, Tahoe, or Suburban? Or the sporty city-friendly Trax? Your local Chevy dealer has exactly what you need to solve the case like a pro. So don't wait. Head to ChevyDriveChicago.com today. Browse the newest models, special offers, locate your nearest Chevy dealer, and start shopping online. Things are warming up out there, and you need a vehicle you can trust. Find yours now at ChevyDriveChicago.com. Chevy, together, let's drive.
So, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. This is a little extra episode because I was thinking about something today that I think affects most people. And certainly I've had this affect me or bother me in my life. And the topic really is, don't let other people pigeonhole you, or don't let other people tell you your worth or what you can and can't do. It's so common, right, for people to weigh in and give advice. And I myself have been guilty of it, where, sometimes people say something once, or they might say it repeatedly about what you can or can't do because of their impression of who you are or what the world will permit you to do. Right. And, I want to be fair. Sometimes people may genuinely want to help us or protect us from something, and they're going by their own experiences. They don't want us to be disappointed if something doesn't work out, or they don't want us to waste our time at something. But even when it's really well-intentioned, right? Maybe somebody's going to say, it's so hard to be a professional athlete. I'm just making this up as I go, but you get what I'm saying. So rather than do that, why don't you study accounting? Nothing wrong with accounting, by the way. Or, you might have an artistic inclination and you think, I love painting, I love sculpting, I love drawing, whatever. Or you love writing. And somebody will say, it's nearly impossible to support yourself on that. Or, your stuff is okay, but, honey, to be really successful, it would have to be something completely different. And again, I understand why somebody would find that to be a helpful kind of thing to tell you, to save you from, wasting your time or being hurt or struggling. But maybe that's for you to figure out, right? And there are people who've been told they didn't have this or that, go on to be quite successful. I'm just thinking of Shakira in my mind. And I don't know a lot about Shakira, but I remember hearing that when she was in school, a music teacher or somebody said, you'll never be successful as a performer. You sound like Kermit the Frog or something like that. I remember hearing that. Kind of wasn't correct, right? Something may not be a fit for you. And I've made this mistake myself where, maybe I've noticed something or somebody's work and said, oh, I don't think it's that great. But then it's become really successful because it resonated with the right people. I wasn't the right audience for that work. And that's completely fine. Or someone thinks this happens a lot, unfortunately, and I think it's harmful in a variety of ways, but their kid's appearance isn't what they would like it to be, and there's all things that get projected onto people like, well, you're not going to find a partner unless you correct this. I mean, it's awful, but it happens probably more than we realize. Or you're not, the right definition of beauty. And maybe this person goes on to become a well-known and successful model. That's happened time and time again, actually. But you don't actually have to be famous or mega successful commercially to be a success in your own life. Because the point of this really is you get to define who you are. You get to define what it is your purpose is here and what brings you joy. And you get to decide what enough is, enough success or how that looks. And it's, we're so conditioned from early on to give away our power to other people, especially some of us more than others. Either it's our family culture. I don't think it's controversial to say that girls tend to be raised to be more pleasing and compliant. That's still a thing. And unfortunately, there's been a resurgence of, people who think that that's actually just the way we should be, which kind of dehumanizes us in a way, not even in a way, right? Somebody telling you you have to do things this way or that way in order to be okay, and that you should not pursue something else. It's not that feedback isn't important. I'm going to give you some examples though. There are a lot of times people give us feedback that really is much more about them, right? So you don't even have to know, and you may never know what the reasons are why somebody wants to tell you what you are or what you can do or what you're worth or what you should be, and also tell you why you can't be all of these other things. You might never know, again, the reasons. Maybe sometimes, a lot of times the reasons are going to be honestly having more to do with them. Even if there's something, a nugget of truth in what they're saying to you or something that's worth considering, right? So sometimes people will be kind of not nice or try and devalue you or take the wind out of your sails because you might remind them of someone else in their life that made them feel inadequate, or maybe that's a thing for them. I'm going to tell you a funny anecdote I wasn't planning on telling you. Years ago, my husband took this job at this young company. I don't know, maybe there were like 35 or 40 employees. And one of the bosses was a guy who was a super fit guy, a triathlete, super confident, really needed a lot of validation though for somebody who seemed apparently confident. So, that tells you something right there. And, my husband was a little bit older than the other people working there. The other people working there were largely in their early 20s. Maybe he was late 20s or 30. But the point is, he was closer in age to this boss. My husband has always been a pretty athletic person. And to me, this sounds totally, absolutely nuts. But like at some point, this guy would, he challenged my husband to a push-up competition in front of the rest of the employees. To me, like, I can't imagine it's not like they were some sort of professional athletic team. This was a sales job. And to make a long story short, my husband made the mistake of winning. So, and from then on, this guy was just awful. Like it was like any chance to chip my husband down or deny him an opportunity or something. It seemed pretty obvious. And thankfully he left that job a long time ago. But I think my husband, for reasons that were not ever clear to him, just triggered something in this guy that he felt like he had to compete with an employee. And it's just weird to me. But again, you may never know the reasons that someone needs to kind of take you down or, make an example of you or whatever. Sometimes somebody was raised to believe in order to have worth, they need to compete with everyone else in their sphere. And that's definitely something almost everybody knows at least one person like this that has to compete at things where there's like completely no point, whether it's a game on family game night or where it just goes a little too far and it's no longer fun. And it's really about this person kind of annihilating other people in some metaphorical way. I know that's a weird thing to say, but you might very well know somebody like this. Anyway, the person I'm thinking of was raised, true story, to compete with everyone, siblings, friends, coworkers, classmates. And there was a kind of not nice feel to it. It would be like under the guise of all in good fun, especially as long as they won. But what I heard from this person, and I have compassion for this person actually, because talented person, smart person, but if you're socialized from early on to have to beat out your siblings in a way that kind of implies that that's where you get your worth from, and to compete with your parents as well, which to me is just, there was an unhealthy flavor to it. I can't really describe it without sharing more than I want to share, but it was just unpleasant to spend time with this person because there was always this feeling that they couldn't just be your friend. They had to somehow best you in some way when you're not even competing. And I think people who are raised like that don't realize that other people actually aren't just trying to do this Jedi mind trick where they're trying to look like they're not competing. Like, it's just not on their radar. They don't care. It's not relevant. But, the problem is, raising your kids this way creates people who can't just relate to people in a way that is supportive or compassionate or equal, because they always have to be better than and make it obvious, or else they don't feel like they have any worth. It's like you're either a winner or you don't even count. And to be honest, that person, for me, I just felt like it was too unhealthy a dynamic, and I just decided I didn't want to have that person in my life. I wish them well. But if you have somebody like that in your life, one of the ways they might kind of try and keep that competitive edge will be to kind of chip away at you and kind of subtly or not so subtly criticize or, tell you why you can't do something or why they're a little bit better or whatever. And it's just such a weird, unhealthy dynamic to have in most of your relationships. Like, if you're a competitive athlete or, on a sales team or whatever, you are competing, but it doesn't have to have this kind of icky flavor to it, I don't think. But that might influence why somebody has to kind of pigeonhole you in a way that isn't very kind. It might not even be accurate. It might just be somebody's own biases, right? And everybody has biases. So some people are less aware of this, and they're I'm going to say more enslaved by their biases, right? Because the biases are driving the ship and not conscious, thoughtful, logical thinking. So for some people, no matter what, they couldn't see your worth. No matter what. God could come down from the heavens to tell them that, no, you actually are meant to be doing this or that thing that you really want to do. And I don't know what you want to do, but think about things you've wanted to do where somebody was like, not for you. And it felt a little bit like a dream crusher, right? It wouldn't matter what anybody said. Sometimes you might feel like you have to prove to somebody who doesn't get you or doesn't get what you want to do. There's no convincing somebody who's invested in having that stance with you. These are just some of the reasons why people pigeonhole people. And I mean this in kind of a devaluing way a lot of the times. But again, sometimes it's like, if you were a girl in the 1950s, your parents would probably tell you pretty logically that your chances of becoming a scientist or a physician even were not likely, or that it wasn't for you, right? You would be steered towards nursing, not to become a physician. Absolutely nothing wrong with nursing, a noble profession. But if that's not what you wanted to do, that wouldn't be what you wanted to hear, right? You might not want to get a secretarial job if you really want to be a mathematician, or you might want to become a mechanic, or you might want to do something that typically girls were steered away from wanting to do, right? So it's not always this nefarious thing. It could just be people's social conditioning. But, of course, there's plenty of research on even things like implicit biases. So these are biases that people don't know that they have, and they would in fact probably tell you they don't have. And the research shows that we all have biases, including ones we wouldn't want to own that we have, right? biases about race, gender, sexuality, appearance, religious affiliation, economic biases. And so we will, in our minds, before we even have the conscious thought, come to a conclusion about what somebody can and can't do or shouldn't do because of these biases, right? This isn't a mind-blowing thing to say. There's plenty of data on this. And it's just a fact of life. But some people, again, are more likely to keep rolling with these biases and steamroll over any evidence to the contrary. And that might very well affect what they tell you is possible for you. So here's the point with all of this. Again, you may not ever know why someone is saying what they're saying to you or coming to a conclusion about you, right? And that can be really frustrating. Sometimes knowing or having a sense, well, this person was raised like this and this is why they're saying this. And, so I don't have to personalize it as much. That can be helpful, but sometimes we'll just never know. And it can be helpful to detach from needing to know, because the point is, it's vital to give ourselves permission to stop letting unhelpful people live rent-free in our minds. And that's really what they do when we allow people to pigeonhole us. If we give up on something that's important to us, a dream, just something that we like to do, something we feel we're good at or want to get better at, because someone else doesn't get it, well, how sad for us. And honestly, that seems like a hollow victory for somebody who wants to be right about stuff. And listen, again, everybody's done this. I'm sure I have done this where I have concluded or given somebody feedback, and maybe it wasn't, even if it was well-intentioned, maybe it wasn't correct. Right? So if you're the person doing that, it's worth just sitting with that and saying, oh, man, maybe I was wrong about that. Or maybe this is something I would want to rethink before sharing. We all tend to do it more often with our own family members and so forth. We're human, but you get where I'm going with this. So I know in a previous episode, I mentioned that if I had $1 for every time someone didn't get me or tried to tell me I wasn't enough or couldn't do something, I'd be a very, very, very wealthy person. And maybe you would too. I don't think I phrased it like that, but it kind of encapsulates it. I have to take a very brief break. But when I come back, I'm going to tell you some examples, see if any of these resonate with you. And even more importantly, I'm going to go over some things we can all do to break free of letting other people determine our worth and live rent-free in our minds. So stay tuned. I'll be right back.
If you've been struggling with your weight, Mochi Health is here to help. Mochi Health is a long-term weight loss solution personalized to fit your unique needs and goals. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who are on a mission to listen. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medications at an affordable set price and get them delivered to their home each month. Take our free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership.
Okay, I'm back. So again, before the break, I was saying, again, if I had $1 for every time somebody didn't get me or tried to pigeonhole me or told me I couldn't do something, and honestly, every time I told myself that, I would be Melinda French Gates. I'd be that wealthy. I'm using her for a reason because she's just like a great person and a huge philanthropist. And we need more people like that in the world. People who can do things that are good on that scale and who choose to do it, right? Sometimes people don't choose to do as much good as they could, but you get where I'm going with this. So I'm going to share a few examples. Some I've shared before, some I haven't. But again, when I was an adolescent, so a very long time ago now, but it's interesting that I remember this. But a neighbor told my parents that I'd never be a psychologist because I talk too much. Right? And I probably did talk too much. I probably had a lot to get off my chest, although the too much thing is really a matter of personal opinion, right? by the way, this was from a person who is not in the field. And I'm probably the only psychologist to this day that they actually know, even remotely. So that's kind of interesting, right? But I remember my parents telling me that. And I don't know, maybe I was like 11 or 12. And so it's interesting that I had floated that idea out then, because I'm many times that age now. But the point is, it's okay that that person had their opinion. It's kind of an unhelpful thing to share that opinion. This person tends to kind of like to kind of rain on other people's parades generally. And you know what? We all have our stuff. I send this person love just like I send the whole planet. We all could use more loving energy in our lives. I don't need to solve this person's stuff for them. That's not my role. I couldn't do it even if I wanted to. But I remember being an adolescent and just feeling like almost like stupid or ashamed that I'd even had this thought, because now oh my God, it must be so obvious to people that I can't do this. You know, and this person had said other stuff too. And that's just kind of how they roll. I'm sending them love, and I'm sending love to my previous self, because you know what? It's okay. But around the same time, I've shared this before, one of my brother's friends commented that my voice was too deep for a girl, and like was making fun of it. And, you know, like what kid likes the sound of their own voice? And, you know, remember back in the day when we had old school tape recorders, and maybe you'd practice like taping something with your friends, and then you'd hear your voice. You'd be like, I don't sound like that. Or like, that sounds awful. So it certainly has not haunted me, but it's interesting that I still remember it. And again, this happened again, you know, similarly when I was in my early 20s, when somebody showed up and was surprised that the person on the phone was the person that they were speaking to. Because I guess they expected somebody different based on the sound of my voice, whatever. But how interesting that most of what I do now involves, yeah, you guessed it, using my voice. But it took a while to get past that feeling of like, ugh, should I be doing this? Or is my voice okay? And you know, it is what it is, right? But how I choose to use it is important and totally up to me, right? I'm going to share another one I don't think I've ever shared. This is fairly painful. And I'm sharing these things not because I'm trying to make this my therapy session in front of the world, just so you know. I'm sharing because the sting isn't there at this point. And again, maybe some of this resonates with you, where you felt pigeonholed, where somebody suggested for whatever reason that you couldn't do what you wanted to do, or something similar. So when I was in my early 20s, I took honestly a low-level, unsatisfying job that I was glad to get, because I was working at a university so I could get free tuition. And there are many things I did not like about working in this role, in this place. But the point is, I was also not only working full-time, but I was going and pursuing a master's degree concurrently. And it's interesting. One of the professors where I worked, he wasn't one of my professors, but, you know, he started making conversation with me and just trying to be polite, I guess. I don't know. I don't think he was probably genuinely interested, but he asked me about the program I was in, which was at the same university where he taught. And, you know, was just asking a few questions here and there. And he said, well, you know, that's great, but you're not smart like these kids are. Because the program where he taught was considered an elite program. It's actually not. I wound up doing my PhD at a different university. I loved my program where I went. Interestingly, the program where he taught, which was definitely in its heyday, was a very important and prestigious program, actually closed kind of suddenly. And they kind of left a lot of their wonderful students, who were wonderful students, but they left them hanging. But it's a weird thing to say to someone, and he didn't know me well. And I can only assume that because of the job I was in, again, one of the lower paying, less glamorous office type of jobs, I guess he assumed that that was the upper limit of what I could do. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with working at any job. If you're working at your job and you're trying to do a good job, whatever it is, there's honor in that. And I really mean that. But I think the point was that because I was doing that job, he thought, well, you can't be that smart, because if you were, you wouldn't be doing this. And there was no thought to, a lot of the students who were in that program also happened to either get a good amount of financial assistance to go to that program, or, just happened to be, it was a small program, and a lot of them came from well-to-do families. And so they didn't have to also find a way to support themselves while going to school. And I did. So, but the point is, again, well, you're not smart like these kids. And the implication was, I guess you're lucky you're doing this because this is it. This is your peak. And I remember being so stunned that this person who didn't really know me would say something like that. Like, why would you even bother to go out of your way to have that conversation? But the point is that it really doesn't matter, because 30 years or so on, his comment didn't hold me back from doing things that I find meaningful and interesting and intellectually stimulating. And, I don't know what it did for him. And I actually haven't spent a lot of time trying to figure out the why. At the time it did kind of sting, because I felt like I was in a disempowered position, especially in that moment. But the point is, people will always project stuff onto other people. At the end of the day, even if we're curious about why, it kind of doesn't matter. And it doesn't really matter whether this is your parent, your boss, your coworker, your friend, your classmate, your partner. I think it matters more, and I'll tell you why in a second. But it kind of doesn't matter, because as you grow and mature and develop, you get to decide the parameters of your relationships. You get to decide who you want to engage with and to what extent, what the boundaries are. You get to decide how deeply you want to take in somebody else's, I'm going to call it constraining feedback or unhelpful feedback. And sometimes it's kind of mean-spirited. But you get to decide how close you want to bring that to you. If it's your partner, I think it matters more, because if you have a partner who is constantly competing with you or devaluing you, to me, pay attention. I'm going to say pay attention to what you're feeling, because if it feels hurtful, if it feels like it shrinks you or is designed to shrink you, you got to then decide if this is the right relationship for you, or how you want to negotiate different parameters or communicate what this feels like. Because to be completely honest, it's like, I've used this analogy before, but it's like if you plant a seed, even in decent soil, and you pour vinegar on it, it's not going to grow. Or if by some miracle that seed can germinate and break through the earth, and you just keep putting salt on it, or, road salt, or if you keep putting some sort of acid on it, even if it survives, it's not going to thrive. And just a real life example is, if you ever notice that as you walk along the side of a road, if there's no curb, and you look at the soil and the plant life next to the side of a road that's been salted, it's usually a lot less dense. It's usually not as healthy. Some things just won't grow there, because it's constantly, year after year being covered with like road salt, right? Or maybe the soil erodes because it's by the end of one area before a roadside. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but I was noticing that the other day, and I thought, oh, that's a perfect metaphor in a way for why things don't grow well in crappy conditions. And some things will break through and flourish to some extent no matter what, but healthy conditions are always going to produce greater growth. They just are. And as we become adults, we get to choose to some extent what we want to fertilize the soil of our lives with, right? And healthy relationships and healthy dynamics with partners, friends, family, coworkers, and so forth. That's what fertilizes the soil that we're growing in. So I want to get now to what we can do, because that to me seems like the key. The most important point of all this is that, yes, everybody has stuff where people say unhelpful crap. You know, I don't think I'll get an explicit rating from saying the word crap, by the way, but we'll see what happens when this comes out. But here's what you can do. I have, I think, like 4 general points. Number 1, choose whether to use negative comments and naysayers' words as motivation, or whether you want to just disregard that and set it to the side, or imagine breathing through it, or imagine you've written it down on a piece of paper and you can just crumble that paper up and throw it in the garbage outside. You don't need it, right? It's up to you. Now, some people, if you're naturally more competitive, and I don't mean being competitive in a negative way, I don't think that's an inherently negative thing. Please know that. I think there's value to being able to compete in a healthy way. But so if this, without having to devalue other people to do it, if you are somebody who is motivated by I'll show you, right? And that's going to make you feel great, imagining so-and-so being like, oh, you didn't think I could be a track star? Here I am winning this race again. Good for you, right? Or somebody telling you you're crappy at math, you'll never be good at business, and you want to start a business, and in your mind be like, I'll show you, 5th grade teacher or whatever. You do that, right? But for a lot of us, like that actually tends not to motivate me. It's just my own wiring. But I think just being like, all right, well, I'm one of these people who tends to like to understand things, but also like, you know what? It's just, that can be your stuff. And you could even imagine handing something back to the person who said it, like it's an object. Maybe it's a gift you don't want, right? If it's well-intentioned, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a pile of steaming poop. I don't know, but you're handing it back to the person and saying, I think this belongs to you. Do what works for you. Another good mental technique for dealing with things like that is to shrink them down to size. I think this can be so helpful, especially when the constant negative commentary or unhelpful advice is from a parent, because parents in our minds always kind of loom large. I mean, this can even be the case still after they pass away. A lot of people don't realize this. I've had patients in their 60s and older who still had long deceased parents who were these kind of overwhelming internal figures for them. But if you imagine shrinking somebody down to size, you can even imagine their voice sounding really high pitched, like just like a little, I don't know, whatever talking, like a little toy, right? Or a little kid. But it takes some of the power and the overwhelm out of what they're saying, but it still allows you to see things more objectively and learn whatever you need to from it, if anything. And I don't know what that is. Maybe there is some lesson in that experience, and maybe the lesson is not to give power to people or situations that don't deserve your time and energy and your power. Don't hand your power to people. You don't have to do that. Or maybe it's to learn what you believe in, right? And get clearer, develop greater centeredness around that. What do you really want for yourself? And what would that look like? And how would you feel? And what would you need to set aside in your mind or let go of? That doesn't even belong to you really, or didn't originate from you. Do that. Practice one of these techniques rather than automatically making other people the arbiters of your worth, right? I mean, listen, 30-something years ago, this elderly professor said, well, you can't be that smart if you're doing this job, basically. And to be honest, this person also has probably long since passed away. imagine how useless it would be to continue living my life by what one person who didn't know me said, right? Because you can probably find plenty of other people, and if not, start cultivating those relationships who can be happy for your happiness, who can be curious about what you want to do and why. I don't even mean people who cheerlead no matter what. Constructive feedback is useful, but you get to decide what your worth is. You get to decide who you want to surround yourself with, and it just takes practice to get into that mindset. So that's number one. Number two, if there's anything to what the person said, this is the hard thing, right? Get in a place where you can consider if there is anything you can use out of what's said, like finding a pearl or a diamond on the beach, right? Tons and tons and tons of sand, and then a small but valuable nugget in there. Or the dollar bill in the trash heap or the dumpster or whatever. If there's something in there that could be helpful for you to understand and work on, it's so hard to take it from somebody who's just heaping a bunch of other stuff with it. But find that, if anything. And if there's nothing there, and a lot of times there isn't, go back to number one and do those mental techniques. So, as an example, the she talks too much, Traci couldn't be a psychologist. Well, I am, but that person has never, ever been a motivator for me for or against doing this. It's kind of like it's their thing. I'm allowing it to be their thing. Again, I'm handing this back to them. That's number one, because it's not worth investing my energy. But in what this person said, maybe it's important for me to be present more. Maybe it's important for me to listen more. And that was certainly something for me to work on then as an 11 or 12-year-old who doesn't need to learn to note what they want to say, but also make room and space for the other person, right? So that conversations and relationships are reciprocal. I think especially at that age, we're learning that, right? We're all a little self-focused, in adolescence especially. And, it's just kind of developmentally normal. Right? Be present, listen. I'm still working on that, right? I still have a lot to say, but that's the nugget, or that's the pearl on the beach. So number three, this is so important. And as you get really good at number three, you almost won't even need the other numbers. Really do the work on this. Get clear on what you want for yourself and who you are, who you'd ideally like to be, right? If you don't know who you are and what gives your life meaning and purpose and where you would like to go, and if you can't find centeredness in the now, other people will always be able to get in there under your skin. It's just the truth. But you are a person with meaning and purpose. Find the you that is more centered. Find the you that has a sense of purpose and can find joy in what you do, whatever that is. And the you that finds you as not only centered, but successful in whatever it is that's meaningful to you. And what I mean by that is successful in a way that's gratifying to you and as you define it. So you don't have to be the star of your basketball team in high school or college unless that's something fundamentally important to you. You could just be somebody who likes to play basketball with your friends on the weekend, and that's a part of you and what brings you joy, right? And that's a way you connect with others. And that's it's a spoke on the wheel of your life that's meaningful. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be famous to be successful. Although if those are goals, why not pursue that? It does not matter if other people get the goals. It matters if you can give yourself permission to keep going. If what gives you meaning in this life is to be a really wonderful parent, that is a noble and honorable goal. Be that. But have an idea of what that ideally would look like. And I don't mean perfect. I mean, you want to be a better listener for your kids? Great. If you want to engage with them more and be emotionally and mentally present when you are with them, that's worthwhile. And that's success. So the more you do that and get clear on what success means for you and understanding that you have inherent worth in the now, you come in here with that worth. So you don't have to prove anything to anybody else to have worth. But as you really spend time on this, getting to know yourself, other people just don't have as much power over how you feel. Right? So maybe this will mean getting into therapy. Maybe this will mean taking some workshops or journaling or reading some good self-help books or listening to some good podcasts. But do the work, take the time. It'll be really worthwhile because at the end of the day, you'll notice that people's desire to pigeonhole you will be so much less of a thing for you and for them because it won't affect you as much. It'll be like you could observe it and be like, all right, well, that's their thing. And then you get back to what you want to focus on. And ironically, or maybe not ironically, people are much less likely to dish out that kind of stuff to you when you're more centered in who you are because it just doesn't go anywhere. Because when it doesn't really affect you, it stops feeding them in some way. So if somebody needs you to look up to them and you're like, I care about you, as a person, but I don't need to go to you for this advice, it stops feeding their desire to make you do that or make you see them in that way. If people want to cause you distress or make you feel lesser than because that gives them, this dopamine hit and makes them feel like, oh, that means I'm better. Once you stop having a strong reaction, and I mean genuinely stop doing it, not just not showing it, but it makes them feel like it's not worth their time ultimately because you are so much more centered in who you are. Their stuff is just not relevant. It really just isn't. And number 4 is look for role models in your life or in the world. Now, if you have somebody in your life who's overcome something similar or followed a path that really means something to you and inspires you, great. But if you don't, you're not alone. In the larger world, look for people who have already overcome challenges that resonate with your challenges, that seems like their journey can be relevant and inspiring to you in some way, even if it's not identical. You don't have to reinvent the wheel of claiming your personal authority and shoring up your self-worth. You just don't. You'll find people who had to go through some stuff to follow their dreams, and you can learn from them. So there's a lot of great free content out there. Of course, there's also paid content, and maybe you'll want to take something to the next level at some other point. But just as some examples, when I'm in the car, I enjoy listening to Lewis Howes and, the School of Greatness. He's got an inspiring story. Did not come from success and wealth and a really solid self-esteem. And where he is now is reflective of all of the work he has done and all of the growth he's done. Ed Milet, a completely different personality. And by the way, completely different from me in terms of his life and how he moves through the world. We're different in so many respects, but I find his stories about people's transformations and overcoming odds to be so inspiring. Another incredible listen, Mel Robbins. I don't have to say anymore. Her podcast is the #1 podcast in the world, and for good reason. You'll learn from her and guests who've overcome significant challenges. Again, you don't have to invent the wheel. Dr. Marielle Bouquet, who interestingly was one of my students when she was a student and is still one of my favorite people and an incredibly smart, talented, successful person who has worked her butt off and, has overcome a lot of challenges and hurdles to do so. And honestly has been inspiring millions of people. She's somebody who's absolutely worth checking out. Read her book, Break the Cycle, listen to her podcast episodes. Dr. Shefali Sabari. I'm naming some people that I actually know because Shefali was a year ahead of me in our PhD program. She's an internationally known best-selling author and coach and parenting expert for a reason. But this is somebody who's completely purpose-driven and talks about how we can reclaim ourselves and do better. Dr. Becky Kennedy, a parenting expert and coach, was, I think, a class or two below me in my PhD, and really just super smart, has such great advice. And again, if a lot of what you want to really get great at is being a parent, Becky's work is so spot on. It's so easy to follow. It's so relatable. I mean, she's done tremendous things with her work. She's a huge influencer, best-selling book. There's a reason for that, right? And we can let their stories inspire us, right? We can feel like what we learn from them supplements what we're learning in our daily lives. These are people who pursued their dreams, found their voices, and they're changing the world. And all most of us have to do is just change ourselves and our portion of the world. We don't have to do this. Everybody doesn't have to be Michael Jordan. You could be the person who's playing basketball again with your friends and loving it. So that's that. I've said plenty, but again, to summarize, don't let compulsive critics take up space rent-free in your mind. Don't let other people pigeonhole you. Don't let other people decide your worth. The best thing you can do in my mind, and I hope in yours too, is redirect your energy. Allow other people's stuff to just be theirs. And you focus on you. You're worth it. Thank you again for being with me today on Unpacking Possibility. I always enjoy spending this time with you. And as always, until next time, be well.